As many of you know, I'm making a samurai game inspired by Hotline Miami, and up until now I've been a little vague or disjointed about the details. But now that most of the game's design has been hashed out, and the pace of development is starting to pick up, I wanted to make a video where I go in depth on my vision for the game and what exactly it is that I'm making here. I want to give you a complete summary, and by the end of this video, you will be as hyped as I am. Let's get started. I've been describing the game specifically as a lo-fi samurai game, and that's because the game's aesthetics are inspired by lo-fi art and music, especially of the Japanese kind. I'm sure many people by now are familiar with Lo-Fi Girl and the countless other lo-fi channels that exist all around YouTube. It's kind of like a subgenre of anime. I hired Amanda Ray to do all of the game's artwork. I recommend checking out her art as I think it's quite good and very fitting for this game's style. I'm afraid we don't yet have too much to share as it's still very early in the process of developing the art, and we've been spending a lot of time experimenting to figure out exactly how we need to do things before we dive right into it. But I can still share with you many of the early concepts and roughs to give you an idea of what the game's going to look like. As you can see, we're going for a hand-drawn style, and although we're still using a top-down view, we are playing around a little bit with the perspective to give it a more unique look. Like I said, this is all very early and rough, but I think it already looks pretty cool, and I can't wait to show you guys more once we've decided on the color palette. We've added some lighting and shadows and shader effects, we get some early sprites and animations for our characters, and so on. Just like the artwork, the game's music and sound design is following the lo-fi style. For the sound design, I hired Lorenzo Morselli. He's a sound designer from Italy who already has a solid amount of experience working on games, and when he first reached out to me about this project, he made a reference to Samurai Champloo, which told me that he understood exactly what I was trying to do. Champloo was probably the first show that popularized this style, and I've been using it heavily as a reference for our sound effects. Not only do I want to recreate that 90s anime style sound, but in a lot of lo-fi anime-related music, you will hear a lot of samples from old anime shows playing in the background, and I wanted to create exactly that kind of feeling when you're playing this game. I want our sound effects to be kind of layered in the background behind the scratchy lo-fi ambience to make it sound like you're hearing samples from an anime show with the music layered over top of it. Lorenzo has already produced a handful of rough sound effects for the game, and I'll be sharing that with you soon enough. As for the music, I've hired a friend of mine that I've known since high school, Alex DiFrancesco. He's a musician and a guitarist who's been making music for as long as I've known him, and he made the entire soundtrack, including the sound effects for my first game, where he did an awesome job. I've put together a playlist of lo-fi Japanese hip-hop music that we are using as a reference for the game's music, and you can find it on my YouTube channel here, or even just check out the description below where I included a link to the playlist. So go and check that out if you want an idea of what the game's soundtrack is going to sound like, or if you just want to hear some dope-ass music. Even the game's narrative has been inspired, at least in part, by the lo-fi style. The main menu will feature an illustration reminiscent of that of lo-fi YouTube videos. You'll have a young guy there sitting in his room, maybe at his table or laying on his bed, studying. He's got his headphones on, he's listening to the beats, and when you decide that you want to start playing the game, he will close his eyes, tilt his head back, and the game will fade into the game's world. And this is because the idea behind the game's narrative is that it's all taking place entirely inside of your own head. It's a kind of dream or power fantasy or like a subconscious exploration that you are playing out inside of your own mind. There will be two main characters, yourself and your imaginary best friend, both of which you will be able to name however you want, or you can use the default names that we're going to come up with for them. In keeping in line with the game's setting, the narrative is intended to be kind of like an introspective or reflective experience. Throughout the game, you'll be having conversations with your imaginary best friend where you will have multiple dialogue choices, and during these conversations, your best friend is going to bring up a variety of topics and hypothetical situations, and you're going to give them your opinion on those topics and situations. And then, as you progress through the game, you will come across gameplay scenarios that are actually reflections of those conversations you had previously, and basically your opinions will be put to the test. You'll be presented with a choice where you can either act in accordance with the things that you said earlier in the conversations, or see if you're going to be tempted into acting in a different way now that you're actually living it out. And then the way that the game's main story unfolds will change depending on how consistent or authentic you are between the things that you say you believe and the way that you actually end up acting throughout the game. To give you an example, your imaginary best friend character might ask you if you would rather confront other people about their beliefs, or would you rather live and let live and avoid confrontation? Then, later on in the game, you'll come across a group of cultists who are worshipping an object, and you'll have the option of either leaving them be or destroying their precious object and seeing what happens as a result. Whatever choice you make, there will be consequences both for the specific situation that just happened, as well as the overarching story, again, based on how consistent your actions are in terms of how they line up with the dialogue you had earlier in the game. I'll be sharing with you guys one in-game example of one of these situations once we get to that point, but nothing more than that, because I do want to keep the rest of the narrative free of spoilers. The gameplay is fast-paced and intense, and much like in Hotline Miami, you can die very easily and you can instantly respawn and reset the level, and you'll have to either plan your approach carefully or at least learn from your mistakes. Your main ability, which the gameplay revolves around, is your dash. You point to any position that's within your reach, and you can dash there extremely quickly, and if any enemies happen to be standing in your way, you will attack them. Early on in the game, the enemies will be easy to kill. It'll just take one attack to take them out, but as you progress through the game, it'll get more complicated. You'll have enemies that will take multiple hits, guys that you have to hit from a certain direction, guys that you have to hit with a certain timing, and so on, and I'm really excited to share with you the different enemy types as development progresses. Your dashing is limited by energy counters that you have in the bottom left corner. Right now, as you see, you only have one, but as you progress through the game, you will gain more. Your dash ability uses energy, and killing enemies restores your energy. Energy will also recharge over time, and if you miss your attacks and you run out of energy, you will become exhausted and you'll move really slowly and you won't be able to dash anymore. But you aren't completely defenseless. You will be able to swing your sword to attack. However, you have to use it carefully because you can only swing your sword once every time you run out of energy. Your other ability in the game is the ability to use items. Throughout the game's levels, you'll come across a variety of items you can pick up and use, such as the projectile that you're seeing here, and using them doesn't cost any energy, so you can use them even when you're exhausted. And the items won't always be weapons either. It could be an item that restores your energy, makes you invisible, gives you a speed boost, and so on. Much like in Hotline Miami, completing a level requires you to kill every enemy in that level. Every fight takes place within the confines of a room. As soon as you enter a room and start attacking, a barrier goes up and can only be removed by eliminating all of the enemies. You always have a bit of an advantage because enemies won't attack until you're running at them, and even then they have a short reaction time delay. On top of that, some walls can be dashed through and destroyed, giving you the option of approaching a fight from different angles. The rooms you've seen so far have been given an outdoor setting, but eventually you'll come across the level's indoor rooms, which unlike the rest of the level's rooms, you are not able to see inside of until you enter them. Fortunately, the reaction time of enemies inside of hidden rooms is slower than in the visible rooms, so that you have a brief moment to observe and react. Now, if this sounds too hard to you, don't worry, there's an alternative. Somewhere in every level, you'll be able to find a map that will allow you to see inside of the hidden rooms. The idea is that there are two ways of exploring a level. One is to go to the map first. This is the easier strategy since it allows you to see inside of the indoor rooms, but it takes longer to complete the level this way, which will prevent you from getting the highest possible score upon completing the level. The other strategy is to go directly through the hidden rooms first, which is harder, but the upshot is that it's the most optimal route through the level, so it's necessary if you want to get the highest possible score on that level. And of course, you're free to mix the two. Maybe you'll go for the map for the first few runs just to get an idea of what's inside the buildings, and then stick to playing the level like a badass until you beat it. Or maybe you'll go for the buildings first, until eventually you come to terms with the fact that you're a little bitch and you need help. And finally, once again taking some inspiration from Hotline Miami, once you've eliminated all of the enemies, you'll have to exit the level by heading back to the starting point and basking in the glory of the bloodbath that you left behind. I know it doesn't look the greatest right now with my shitty prototype programmer art, but don't worry, we'll be turning the blood, gore, and destruction knob to 11 as we develop the art. I'm hoping to have the Steam store page up within the next few months, followed by a playable demo a couple months after that, and ultimately I'm aiming for a February 2025 release date. Now I can't promise anything, except to say that this is my full-time job, and I will try my absolute hardest to make sure that I meet all of these deadlines, and hopefully even manage to beat them. Alright, well now that you have a more complete picture, you can see just how fucking sick this game already is and is going to be, and you can see just how much of an absolute fucking genius I am. Thanks for watching. You can support me by checking out my first game, and if you want regular updates on the development of this samurai game, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel here, or follow me on Twitter/X, Instagram, Facebook, or Reddit. And I look forward to seeing you guys again next week.